All right, everybody. Welcome, 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 welcome. So, today, this is the Autism Experience podcast. This is going to be the first of its kind. We're going to be doing this solo. In the last 4 years, I've dedicated much time to having a guest so I could, better start to tell stories, better get acclimated with the audience. And funny enough, here's an admission. The idea only came to me yesterday, and I'd like to give a shout out to Satya Sri Mahabir, who was one of my early guests back in 2022. She just put out a newsletter, if you guys subscribe to her, and she basically said she's going to go solo. She's going to go solo. I'm not going to fully do this solo, but what I'm going to do is in between guest recordings, I'm going to start doing 30-minute podcasts with more I'm going to do more 30-minute podcasts by myself so you guys get to know me a little more intimately, since sometimes, depending on the guest, I can get a little passionate. So I thought for our purposes going on right now, it would be excellent for me to start doing a few more solo records, throughout the month and between guests, since sometimes I can't always get a guest. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get into it. All right, welcome back to the Autism Experience podcast. So, what is unique about this podcast is, besides my storytelling, you'll finally get to learn more about me, who's eventually going to be registering his own business. There are different things throughout the first brand, which was Pick Your Brains podcast, that I focused on. I focused on parts of my storytelling as acquired to the guest and things like that. So why I wanted to give you my own perspective is because I thought it would enhance the platform, and this is an umbrella podcast. So I had the opportunity to interview 40 different people, from social workers to people who run their own businesses or were co-founders and founders. And we talked about so my guests arranged from social workers to three founders to career and business coaches, an occasion, at least I think one recruiter, if I'm mistaken, but basically a lot of business professionals. And recently, I've been bringing on more people from the real estate community because last year, during my unemployment phase, which happened back in March, I was attending Save the Chat, which was a weekly meetup for real estate investors. So this year I've been dedicated to teaching people more about finance, how to make your money work for you, and that kind of stuff. So after, my last two guests, I kind of made a fun decision to do this solo. I wanted to see how it would go solo, and here we are. Okay. People know guests, but do they know my perspective? What I have learned through this journey, what does building a media company while being on the autism spectrum actually look like? And today I want to talk about why I'm adding solo episodes and some lessons. So, why I started my podcast. Here's the context. Back in 2020, when COVID-19 first hit the Westchester County, New York City area, and we were on lockdown for about 2 weeks. At that time, I was still working part-time in the Goodwill, and I was also working part-time between Hastings on Hudson Union Free School System. That I had graduated college in 2019, and in May of 2019, the job market wasn't that great. Before that, I'd mostly been spending about, let's say, 16, 17, 18 years total in retail customer service. So back in 2004, I graduated from John Jay High School. And to give you a little more context, we're going to start off at 4 years old. I was born September 13th, 1985. So being born then meant I graduated high school in 2004. At 4, I was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, hyper ADHD, and and mild autism, or Asperger's syndrome, as we called it back in the 1990s. the labeling back then kind of meant that people called me things like mentally retarded. They called me a lot of names that got changed over time or turned into something else to kind of sound nicer. But in all reality, what autism now is actually all it is a learning disability. I've said this on comments before, but basically, the only thing it really is a learning disability. It means that I need documented things like extended time, you know, special location, and proctor. Those were things that I sometimes needed in college that I did definitely use. Whether they were effective or not, I think we can put a question mark on that. But basically, during this time on the podcast, as an autistic adult, I've worked in corporate environments, I've worked in retail, I've interviewed entrepreneurs, I've interviewed artists. I'm figuring things out along the way. So I created this platform starting after a content challenge in 2022, which was in 2021 with my mentor, Dan Fredenberg. I started this whole platform as a way to start conversations with people because unfortunately, the problem between 2020 and 2021 was honestly access to reasonably good salary jobs or making a better living for myself because of the customer service path. I don't think the customer service path best fit me. And in later solo episodes, I'm going to start going over a document back from 1994 that was studied in Indiana by a think tank, the state of Indiana think tank over four different types of career paths that suit people who are on the autism spectrum. So we'll be going into that in a later episode. The biggest lessons that I've learned. The the biggest lesson I've learned, there is no one right way to be successful. And this comes because in the 90s and the early 2000s and even the late 2000s, a lot of millennials, those born between 1981 to 1996, were fed a narrative of you go to college once you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a degree, whether that's in 4 years and then you do a master's, maybe six. And eventually, if you decide to do a PhD, which is another 3 years, you stay in one career, you move up the ladder. Okay, well, that sounds like an interesting menued narrative, but that worked in a certain time period. That worked for the baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 1964. So the narrative began to change because that worked for boomers, the silent generation, who are now aged 81 to as old as 98 or 99, give or take. That narrative worked for almost a large portion of the 20th century. But now, because we're in the 21st century, the narrative has changed. And my generation is the first generation, I think, to end up with at least two major life-changing events, which was COVID-19, and then before that, the 2008 recession or global meltdown. Now, let's focus on autism. For many autistic adults, even in the millennials generation, we got hit probably a little more harder than past generations, whether they were autistic or not. Why? Because that single event kind of made it a little more difficult, along with the actual understanding of autism and abilities. So all autism basically means when you're in the working world is you take that IEP that you had from education, which is an individualized education plan, which are asking for certain things, and you just put it more specifically into job categories. So basically, if I needed a special location in real or a proctor in reality in the work world, what I would need is a little more time to understand what I'm learning in terms of the job and functions. Nowadays, you get access to a work mentor or somebody who trains you at least very thoroughly in the beginning. And then, they take the wheels off and let you start, developing on the job. It was for me, on the very least, at least coming from a retail background, you learned along the way, which wasn't always necessarily a good thing, but that's just how customer service was. Sometimes we build our opportunities. Sometimes we combine mutual interests. Sometimes we take unconventional paths. This is starting to become a bigger narrative for everyone who isn't necessarily always selected to work what we call the 9 to 5. That doesn't make us failures. It means we're creating lives that fit who we are. So for me, when starting this podcast, being as I came from John Jay High School in Cross River, where a lot of people's families kind of push them into the 9 to 5, I am in a 9 to 5 as well, but I'm building something else for myself because unfortunately now at age 40, the opportunities dry up. So for me, this meant exploring podcasting, business, technology, and advocacy all at the same time. Whether it was smart to do it all at the same time, we'll leave up for debate, and we'll let you guys, the audience that's growing in my YouTube channel, decide, how you view this as the project grows and as it moves on. In building Opinionated Collective, one thing I've been working on is building Opinionated Collective. Opinionated Collective was originally a panel discussion podcast, but it broke off into a few different areas. Pick Your Brains podcast, or Pick Your Brains with Benjamin, then branded to Pick Your Brains podcast. Pick Your Brains podcast, I think, reached a point where it was sounding too general, so I rebranded it back in 2024 to now Autism Experience podcast. Both podcasts kept the same idea, but my host and character evolved as the project evolved. Meaning, at the very, very beginning, when I was aiming for a general audience, I wouldn't talk about autism that much because I was learning host at that time, which was unfortunately a lot of timing. There was over talking, the guest, which you probably shouldn't do because I've been critiqued on this a couple times. And then, you know, where it was when it went to just Pick Your Brains podcast, and I was getting much better. What changed in 2024 from 2023 to 2022 wasn't so much the guest average. It was in 2024 when I started doing small video projects with Justin, like about sports, which is something I'm always incredibly passionate about. I may bring Justin in eventually as a guest on this. Justin Dickerson is one of my co-founders who lives in South Carolina now. We've been doing this project remotely the whole time. And at the beginning, he ran these Zooms. That was until I had an appropriate computer. So we kind of planned it like this. We planned it where he would run the Zooms, I'd invite the guest, he'd schedule the guest because I didn't have proper equipment at that time. I started to acquire it because I was on meaningly low salary. By 2024, when I finally started acquiring more, I just had to get a more appropriate space like where I'm living today. And then last year and this year, I started doing 1 to 2 more things for myself, which was I began running the Zooms, but I still needed him to upload the videos. And then finally this year, because he was busy with computer science school, I finally started loading the videos myself, which is the second to last component of running a podcast. The final component is me having to relearn editing with things like Adobe Premiere and today's modern AI tools. One thing I want to add in building a podcast. I didn't start doing this until COVID, and part of the reason is in entrepreneurship, this is a huge lesson that I think you should all learn. And it's something I learned way too late in my life, and not even too late, more like my 30s. The people you spend your time around shape what you want to do. So for me, coming from John Jay, most of the people who I was comfortable with, who I only started cutting contacts with more recently because, life changes and then my own frustrations learned. You can keep people around, but you end up having different types of friends for different situations. The version of it I learned is I held on to my high school friends way too long, till age 38, to the point where as we grew up as adults, they would often talk down to me. They came from the type of households where the 9 to 5 was the preferred path, even back in the late 2000s, mid to late 2000s, and throughout the 2010s, the message was the same. College, job, create your life, buy a house, meet someone, get married, start a family. But for me, this unfortunately didn't work out because now look what I'm doing at age 40, sitting in a studio apartment making content, for you all. So where did my life go wrong is what they would say, in my opinion, in my view. Well, I have autism. Maybe I have autism and ADHD. And if you guys really, really, really did more research into things like this, you might learn that unfortunately autism is not looked at as much as we've had advancements in discussion from the 2000s and the 90s, where the terms were "you're mentally retarded" or "autism sounds" or "Asperger syndrome sounds like you're an asshole." We've now gone, thanks to Gen Z, to being able to actually discuss it openly, might I add. So failure was a big lesson that us millennials were taught was not tolerated. All failure really means is first attempt, first attempt at failure. Basically, all it really means is, in today's context, if you fail when, let's say, you're in your early or mid 20s and you're living with your parents, you have kind of a fallback. As you get a little older, unfortunately, the risks and experiments that you're going to take, even if you're an autistic person or someone with ADHD and autism, is the decisions get more expensive. There is thought to the whole idea we're young. I don't fight my parents on that one, or at least my mom. But the young we're talking about is not me being young versus somebody coming out of college at 24 who, let's be honest, can take more risks in this world. There isn't always a blueprint, that existed like in the world of work. So, as another mentor of mine, Madeline Maldonado, who I might also invite onto this podcast, pointed out, when I was coming out of school in the 90s, and then when I went to my bachelor's program and then my master's program and took my LCSW and then did my clinicals and then started as a therapist, that path was the assumed path in social work. Yes, in a structured environment like healthcare or mental health, you have a map or you have the blueprint. But when you become a business major, in my case, or you're doing a specific technology skill, I wouldn't fully say that there's a blueprint to that path too. Because unfortunately, today, with the advancements in technology, even just look at something like podcasting. The reason it was discouraged back in the 2000s was because you needed large capital to do this. You needed a studio and you needed to pay a crew and, have an editing team, a story team, a marketing and promotions team, and basically work at a major network. That changed when YouTube started becoming popular in 2004. And then as our technology got better with things like digital marketing and the introduction of Zoom and AI tools, now even video editing tools, Adobe Premiere and stuff like that, now you can actually start to do more solo podcasts on lower budgets. So the waiting in that situation may have actually been smarter, where some people will call it a strategy. But the people that I had who were the 9 to 5 crowd did not really experiment with entrepreneurship. And I'm going to share a fun story from my best friend's wedding in 2023. He got married to his wife now, and they have a 2-year old, and he lives up in Katona Somers border. So when we were at his wedding in upstate New York in 2023, the criticism from all of them are, you spend too much time between networking, building a podcast that isn't making a lot of money. Why is it you can't get a better 9 to 5 job with a more reasonable salary? What I realized at that point, and a year later and a year later when I moved to this space, when the other criticism was you have too many clothes, which isn't in reality that I have too many clothes, it just looked like a lot moving. They're kind of self-projecting on themselves. So they're using me, who's on the autism spectrum, who, even when I cut off, Richard Quinn, who I'd known since Katona Day Camp, I think what I came to finally realize and learn is that it's not so much projecting on themselves. They were projecting their insecurities about me becoming successful in a different way. Yes, the podcast didn't really start technically making money until this year through a partner accountability service that Dan helped structure that we were working on together, and then we had to stop, because life happens. So, this is a service for my audience that if you're potentially considering, you and I can explore on a call if you'd like to, consider that. And we'll discuss criteria and stuff like that. And back in 2023, I completely understood what they were saying. What I think I would look back now and say is I'm on the autism spectrum. So your definition of success is using an old formula. My definition of success today, even if it looks like, I'm too detached from you guys, I'm not appreciating the time together, I'm not taking jokes the way I used to. What this is called, even just for an autistic person, is growing up. Sometimes when you begin to do something, Madeline pointed out that sometimes learning to advocate for a group can open up different opportunities. Sometimes I think we don't think about that, but sometimes that's a door to opportunity. Opportunities don't necessarily have to be 9 to 5. They could be something like consulting. I'm an autism consultant and an autism trainer. I offer a presentation, which I'll be talking about in these 30-minute episodes, and I offer several services as well. So in the last, let's say, 10-15 minutes, what I want to tell you guys is if you're a job seeker, if you're a potential entrepreneur, if you're a real estate investor, if you're a real estate executive, if you're a landlord and you're looking to potentially create media and build a podcast, I'm definitely available. So just get in contact with me by email, benjaminvabner@gmail.com. You can also contact me on LinkedIn. Benjamin, just look up the name Benjamin Vabner. You can contact me on Instagram, BV99001 in my box, and we can talk there. Couple ways to contact me, but if you also want to possibly hire me as an eventual consultant and speaker for your organization, that's another possibility. We can discuss a bunch of possibilities. I'm flexible like that. So, with that said, how I would like to close is the next show over the next series of 30-minute, however long this goes with 30-minute episodes. I'm not abandoning guest interviews. That will You will see guest interviews, though that format is just up to an hour, depending on their time. I still love having conversations with interesting people. I also want listeners to hear more directly from me. So when I have things that are on my mind like this, I'm going to do 30 minutes separate on another day. I want listeners to be more direct, hear more directly from me. That means discussing current events, entrepreneurship, autism in adulthood, career challenges, media trends, whatever else I can provide value on. Some episodes will have guests, some will just be me sharing what I've learned in real time, and hopefully that can create a stronger community while my YouTube channel is growing, while my LinkedIn maybe grows a little more. Maybe I can grow my Instagram this way, but ultimately, I'm looking for opportunities, whether it's consulting with your organization, whether it's doing a presentation for your organization, whether you want me as a speaker, whether you want me, to be on a contract and help your organization gain a better understanding of how to work with your autistic workforce. These are all possibilities that we can definitely discuss as you get to know me a little more intimately. So, with that said, see, I hope you guys have a good, restful weekend, and I will see you at the next one.